Alrighty, everyone. We're here today with Brandon Tam, our orchid specialist. Hi, Brandon.
Hi, how's it going?
We're doing great, and we're really excited for this tour. Brandon, can you tell us a little bit about your progression through the horticulture industry and the position that you perform for the Huntington?
Yes, absolutely. So my general interest in plants started when I was a child, maybe 7 years old, and I love growing orchids. Ever since that age, and my grandmother was the one that actually brought me into growing orchids. She would garden with me at a very young age, and because of that, I got into the hobby of that, and over time, I wanted to become eventually a career. I started volunteering at the Huntington at the age of 14, and at the age of 16, the director here of the Botanical Garden, Jim Folsom, actually discovered that I had a great interest in orchids and invited me over to be a part of an internship for about 6 months. After that 6 months, he hired me on as the orchid specialist here to manage the Huntington's collection, this is just one greenhouse of many, but the majority of the orchids are actually in this greenhouse. To manage that and to grow the collection over the years to really be a part of a core collection here at the institution.
Would you like to give us a kind of short history of how the Weltz orchid collection came to the Huntington and talk a little bit about that massive effort to move and catalog that collection?
Absolutely, that's a fantastic question. So the majority of the orchids in here, I'd say about 80% of the orchids that you see in this greenhouse came from one single gentleman by the name of Robert Weltz, who lived in Montecito, in Santa Barbara actually. He was quite the wealthy individual, had a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, and because of the amount of wealth that he had, he was able to buy some of the best orchids that you could find on the market. He was a fantastic hybridizer of slip orchids, which are the majority of the orchids that you'll see behind me. For the most part, they generally come from, the majority of what we have here comes from Southeast Asia. And that's what he mainly collected. So on his deathbed, he said he wanted the collection to come to the Huntington, in which it came to the Huntington. And it was a big task to bring this entire collection of over 7,000 plants into this greenhouse at the Huntington. My boss, our former director here, Jim Folsom, rented a long rental truck, and we packed that truck and actually made trips, 5-round trips from Montecito to the Huntington here in San Marino.
Wow.
Around 5 times to get all the material here. He went out, he bought 500 milk crates. We went up to the property, we put in all the plants into these milk crates, stacked them up high, sent them into the rental truck, and brought them down here to the Huntington. And it was a big endeavor. One thing to keep in mind was, unfortunately, Mr. Weltz was not in the greatest health in the last few years of his lifetime, and a lot of the plants were in need of a repotting. They needed improvement in health. So the urgency in which to bring this collection down back to the Huntington to get it all repotted and back into good health was a big priority. And that's why it was such a big rush to get it down to our collections. In the process of bringing down the material down to the Huntington, we decided that we would print out 10,000 labels. And at the property of Mr. Weltz, we would stick a label from 0001 to 10,000 into every plant into the collection that Mr. Weltz had. And this was to help mainly figure out where were all these plants located in the greenhouse. We didn't have the time or the luxury to do an inventory there. So what we did was we printed out all these labels, stuck them in, and as we got them down back to the Huntington, we can actually piece it together using the numbering system. And it wouldn't be a perfect visualization of how the collection looked like and how they were placed in Mr. Weltz's greenhouse, but actually gave us some idea of where were they located and how were they grown in a specific area within the greenhouse. So big combination of efforts. We have 3 to 4 people, 5 people there just packing plants throughout the week and sending them back down here at the Huntington.
Very cool. Wow, that sounds like a big effort. How many people were involved in that?
It was Jim. Jim was the director here, and he was always on hand. He was there driving the truck and putting things in. So there was me, and I believe there were 3 to 4 other interns at the time that actually got that done.
Very cool.
Here, but big project.
What a fun job. What are some of the goals of this orchid collection, and how do you feel the humanities kind of intersect with this collection?
Absolutely, good question. So our job here at the Huntington is to conserve the plants. These plants are a snapshot of what we have at the moment. Of course, as climate has changed, dramatically, a lot more dramatically in the last few years. We're seeing plants, animals, insects starting to go extinct, certain species out there. And this is our way of covering this group of orchids that we want to focus on. And we really communicate and talk to other botanic gardens throughout the world and see what other people are focusing on. There's really no point in all these botanic gardens focusing on one specific genus, one specific species.
Mm-hmm.
It's better to diversify and have everybody specialize in a specific group that is favorable to them. So for example, because of our region, we are able to grow things outdoors in Southern California. So it'd be smart of us to do a Cymbidium species collection, because that's something that doesn't require a greenhouse like this, which just
Right.
costs maintenance and heating and cooling. But that's not going to discourage us from actually trying to do some of that as well. Happy pedalums is the perfect intersection here at the Huntington, because in Southern California we do have a strong emphasis with this genus, and we have a lot of local growers that actually do the same as well. So this is something that we focus on, and of course with the material that we have, we make divisions, we share them with other botanic gardens throughout the United States, and share that material with them so that they have a duplicate copy. So in the case, unfortunately, if something ever happened to this greenhouse, if it burned down, if something happened that is unforeseeable, we have a duplicate copy somewhere else throughout the United States where we can call them and say, hey, can we get a division of this? Hey, can we get a division of that?
Right.
And on top of that, orchids is one of the largest families in the botanical kingdom. That being said, I make mistakes myself. I may accidentally kill a very valuable plant, but I can lessen that risk by making a division, sending it off to a different institution, and ask them at the later date to give us a division back when that plant is of appropriate size. So things like that is very important, to share that material, to make sure that we have something genetically the same somewhere else. It's the Mona Lisa is a painting that's very valuable, but unfortunately there's only one Mona Lisa. But thankfully plants have the habit of duplicating themselves, in which we can share among the world.
Right. Another question I have for you is, who do you feel is the intended audience for our orchid collections, and how do you do outreach to that audience to share our collections?
That's another great question. So the audience that I see most interested in orchids is truly everybody. So orchids you can actually find on every continent in the world except Antarctica. And because of that, there's this level of connection that you can make between the groups around the world. That's a similarity that everybody can relate to. There's orchids in the US, there's orchids pretty much in every country that you actually go to. And because of that, there's a level of connection through that point. And not only that, but through the education of that. Most people don't realize that orchid is actually that vanilla is actually an orchid. And because of that, people have this realization that over the years, what they've been consuming, baked goods, ice creams, you name it, it allows them to connect through this level of similar knowledge, similar ability that's obtainable, things that you can visit any country, any botanic garden, and they will more than likely have orchids there. But I feel that orchids specifically can be a great way to encourage a younger audience to enter, because it's one of the more common houseplants that you can purchase at your local home improvement stores, your markets. And there's nothing wrong with buying your local supermarket orchid. It's kind of an entry point into getting interested into something that can grow over time. And that's the whole point of growing plants, is you want to over time become more of an expert in it, but you got to begin somewhere.
Very nice. I know that typically when we're outside of COVID, we've had these really grand orchid shows and sales, and that's been an opportunity to kind of take some of these orchids out of the greenhouse and showcase them.
Yes.
I know you did that a little differently this year. Can you tell us just kind of the unique opportunity you had to display some of these cool orchids?
Yeah, absolutely. So every year in October we have the Huntington's October Orchid Show, in which we invite international vendors and local societies to come and display and sell their plants. Unfortunately, with the pandemic last year, we were unable to have our normal orchid show in the buildings because of the guidelines that we have. We can't have anybody in the buildings due to the pandemic. So the creative idea came from my former director, who said, why don't we have it outside? And this is definitely a challenge to do, because generally a lot of these orchids that people are bringing in to share with us to put on display from local societies and from our own collection are of great value. So we typically like to have these things in a controlled setting in a building, but unfortunately we couldn't do that. So what we decided to do was move the orchid show into the Chinese garden, where we can have these things on display, where people can visit in a safer setting, as opposed to having it in a building. Now, we couldn't do everything to its fullest extent. We couldn't do sales because that required a lot of interaction of money transactions, handing out plants, but unfortunately we couldn't have that happen, but at least we could have orchids on display in the gardens, on tables, under different terraces and different buildings.
So cool.
Outdoor buildings that are not enclosed, to allow people to come and visit and still appreciate the orchids, because the conservatory at the moment is also closed because it's also in an enclosed building, so we can't have any orchids displayed in there. So the only opportunity to actually see some of the orchids last year during the pandemic was during that one time at the orchid show. But that was unfortunate, but hopefully brighter days are ahead of us where we can actually go back to the orchid show.
I think so, but I think it was also a very special experience amidst a challenging time. So thank you so much for all your hard work on that. That was really awesome. How many volunteers help maintain this collection, and what type of jobs do they perform? Yeah,
that's we have a group of about 40 volunteers that used to come in on a weekly basis into the collections to help manage the collection. Pre-pandemic, we would have around 40. At the moment, we have around 4 or 5 just because of the pandemic. You can only have a certain amount of people in the greenhouses or in workstations. But in a normal setting, these 40 volunteers would come in once a week, dedicate 3 hours a day or 3 hours a week, to come in and help manage the collection, whether it may be watering, repotting, dividing, grooming, pollinating, cleaning. They'll do everything and anything. They're really here for the mission of the Huntington, and it's to support this collection. There's no job that will discourage them from helping us do what we need to do. Just a few days ago, we had a volunteer come in, help fertilize. We have a dosatron machine back there to really help fertilize our orchids. We have one of the largest orchid collections in the U.S., and we have one of the most diverse collections, species diverse collection in the world. And because of that, we really need a lot of people to help manage this collection. And the institution itself, we have around 1,500 volunteers throughout the entire organization. But specifically for orchids, we have 40 volunteers, and they come in and they do basically anything that's needed that day. Every time you walk into the greenhouse, there's always something new. There's always something that needs to get done. So it's a really true blessing that we have these volunteers to support our mission here at the Huntington.
Very cool. Well, on that note, maybe we should walk around and take a look at some of these amazing orchids.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned before, the majority of what we have here are slip orchids, and the reason why they call these slip orchids is because of the pouch that you see here. And the majority of the slip orchids that you see in this greenhouse are actually from Southeast Asia. The pouch here is actually a pollination mechanism in which it helps encourage insects to pollinate the flowers. So we're going to do a little demonstration here. So this is the flower itself. Now, whenever I want to pollinate the orchid, I myself will pull the pouch off to access the pollen a little easier. But this pouch here, which is supposed to be connected to here, the insect will fly in and will exit through the top, where they'll collect one of 2 of the pollen that's at the top here. So this is the pouch in which discourages or actually encourages the bug to go in and guide itself out to collect that pollen.
Very cool.
With that, you can see that the pollen is here. I'll pull off one of the pollen. That's one there. It's a little hard to see if the camera is not very focused.
On the tip of your finger. Right?
Yeah, on the tip of my finger. And this is actually interesting. If you actually look pretty closely, this is you'll see that there's actually a small little fly there. So this fly actually got tricked or encouraged to go into the pouch to go in and collect this pollen. But the funny thing is, this pollen is about 3 times the size of that fly. Now, that fly, just got stuck into the pollen because it's so small, but this is kind of a general idea that the fly goes in and collects the pollen and flies out to a different plant. Now, pretend it flies to a different plant, and then it does the same thing, goes back in the pouch and crawls back up. And when it crawls back up, it deposits that pollen on what is called a stigmatic plate. I usually use a toothpick, so it's a little messier. But basically, you want the pollen to be stuck on that stigmatic plate, and that's when you get a pollinated flower. And eventually, the flower, this part will fall off, and this becomes a seed pod. Give it 1 year, and you'll have thousands of seeds in this one single seed pod. And of course, use your imagination here. 1 year later, when I open this up, you'll see thousands of seeds. If you sneeze on it, it'll just fly everywhere. But that's what you expect when you open up the pod in about a year.
So they're as small as like dust?
They're small. They're as small as dust. If you sneeze, they'll fly everywhere.
Wow.
And you really have to capture the seeds at the correct moment, because if it pops open, all that seed's going to fly out over time. So you really got to pay attention to anything you pollinate in here. You got to check it. You got to figure out when it will mature, and you got to capture it right before it opens up, because you need to capture all those seeds.
Do you like bag the seeds?
Yeah.
Or?
So an easy trick to do is getting a coffee filter paper.
Okay.
And when you maybe a week or 2 weeks before you think it's going to pop open, you can put this coffee filter over it. Use a little twist tie, twist it on, and if it does burst open, you can capture it in that coffee filter bag.
Oh, very smart.
Yeah.
Very smart.
So this is just a slipper orchid here. This is a few more here. As we walk through, you're going to see a lot of these slipper orchids.
What's the best time to view this collection?
The best.
The most floriferous time, I mean.
Because orchids will bloom year round depending on what species or which genus you're looking at. But for Paphiopedilum specifically, the majority of them, if you're to graph this out on a graph, the majority of them will bloom mostly in spring, so March, April, May, June. So we're just at the beginning of the season here. This year, it's a tad little late on the later side, but you can see things are actually coming into bloom now at the moment.
Right.
But if you do plot it on the graph, the greatest concentration of blooms you'll see is actually starting now.
Very cool.
As I mentioned before, the majority of them come from Southeast Asia. Here's some species here. You have Paphiopedilum ixol. You have Paphiopedilum greatrixianum here. With this genus, we have, I believe, around 100 recognized, accepted species of Paphiopedilum, and we approximately have 90% of all the known species so far.
Wow.
So we're
that's impressive.
Yeah, we're making, it's very important to focus on one group and do it well.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we more or less mastered this collection, we're going to start into a new genus.
Really?
From there. So,
is there a new genus that you've started on recently?
Yeah. So most recently, within the last 2 years, is Stanhopea. Stanhopea are these orchids that have pendulous-like flowers that come from the bottom of the plant. That you can find typically in South America, Ecuador, Brazil, Mexico as well.
Where do they live here at the Huntington?
They live in the other greenhouse, the intermediate to cool growing greenhouse,
okay.
In which the temperatures are on a cooler side. They're not quite a cool growing greenhouse, but the combination between cool and intermediate, because they do appreciate higher elevation, and higher elevation usually means cooler temperature.
So you talked a little bit about orchids coming from all around the world, and I know that you and Alyssa put out a really comprehensive database of some of the orchids that we have here in our collection. Can you talk a little bit about that database?
Yes.
Since it's available to the public, I can link this to...
Of course. That's during the pandemic, we realized that we could not have the general public visit our collections because the conservatory being closed. So we thought it's time to be a little creative. We don't know how, at that time, we didn't know how long this pandemic would last. Of course, with vaccinations coming out, we're looking at a better scenario going forward. But at that time, a year ago, we didn't know what was going to happen. So we decided, why don't we create a website which would have a database of some of the highlighted plants that we have in our collections. We have over 10,000 orchids within our collection, and we've only gotten started with documenting pictures of what is blooming in our greenhouses. So they'll slowly be uploaded onto the website over time, but we have, I believe, over 200 plants on the database at the moment in which you can visit. And they're pictures of the plants of some of the orchids that we have in bloom here at the Huntington. And it provides a little background of where they're from, what elevation you can find them from. a quick fact about it, where you can find some cool facts about the fragrance or some cool tricks that it does for pollination. But this website is just to highlight the collection that we have through an online platform that is made accessible through those who were at home during the quarantine. But it's evolving over the next few months to just be a part of a standard ability for the general public outside of the U.S. because many people outside the U.S. have not been to our gardens. This will allow them to view our collections virtually right behind their computer, and that's the beauty of technology, is the ability to connect to new audiences even though you're not geographically here in our proximity of our gardens here.
That's amazing, Brandon. Yeah. All right, well, let's look at a few more orchids.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have Paphiopedilum hainaldianum here, which is hainaldianum. These are the benches that we're passing by are mostly species. Paphiopedilum colapeckinii. This is just popping out in bloom at the moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
super cool.
a bit of variety here. Those are species.
They have a lot of personality, these flowers.
A lot of personality. People always call the petals more like a mustache.
Yeah, it looks like a face.
Yeah, exactly. Here we have hybrids. So this is a historical hybrid that we have here. And the importance behind this was a very famous hybrid back in the day in the United Kingdom. It was hybridized in the UK. But what had happened is in World War II, there were a lot of course, in World War II, they had to shut down these conservatories that were there because they needed to melt down the metal to build weapons to fight in the war, and they had to shut off a lot of energy, a lot of heating, a lot of things that would normally go towards conservatories to divert to the war efforts. And on top of that, people were afraid that these greenhouses or conservatories would be bombed in the process. So what they did was they sent these seedlings to the U.S. to be for safekeeping during times of war. So during war, we always hear expensive artwork, expensive pieces of material being secretly taken out of the country and hidden in allied countries. But people don't really mention about plants. And this is just 2 plants that were sent out during World War II to the U.S. for safekeeping. And we actually sent a division of this to the U.S. Embassy, or to the UK Embassy in Washington, so that they have a piece there in their greenhouses. So some historical aspect there, but
I think that's really interesting to know. I feel like when you get to know plants more intimately, feeling them as part of your own history, being part of the ecosystem that they come from, becomes a much more profound experience.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you touched on that.
Absolutely. There's here at the Huntington, we collect hybrids for their historical importance, and we also collect species for its conservation purposes. And we think both are equally important in that aspect. When I was walking through the greenhouse yesterday, I pulled this plant out.
Wow.
This is Paphiopedilum rothschildianum, and they call this the king of slipper orchids because at that time the flower was one of the larger flowers that they discovered within the genus, and it's probably the most commonly used parent plant used in hybridization. Because of the size of the plant, because of the color of the plant. But you can see here, this single plant, this single pot that's maybe 8 inches large has maybe 20, 30 divisions coming up from one plant.
So it's a vigorous grower, or this one's just old?
It's old. So this one, some of the plants that are in here, they could be 30, 40 years old.
Wow.
The plant itself is 30, 40 years old. So each vegetative growth may only survive for 2 to 3 years. After that, it'll start to fade, but before it starts to die off, it'll put out new growth. So genetically speaking, this plant is 40 years old. But of course, you'll never find a 40-year-old division last that long.
Right.
It's just putting out new growth while the old growth dies off.
Senesces.
Exactly. So that's a bit of variety. But here's another orchid that we get. That's not
interesting.
That's not a slipper orchid. This is a cymbidium. This is a Chinese cymbidium. Comes from different regions in Asia, and this back in the day was pretty highly regarded within imperial culture in China.
That's a regal
Yes,
statue.
Exactly. This is more or less kind of the bonsai for the orchids in China, of the orchid collectors in China. People grow this more for their leaves more than the flowers, though the flowers are much appreciated as well. But back in the day, Confucius would study a lot about this plant.
Really?
And do his Confucianism within this realm.
I like this. So it's a philosophical plant. I like it.
It's people throughout history have studied a lot about orchids, and they thought a lot about orchids themselves in a philosophical way, as well as a scientific way. So.
Are these part of your integrated pest management program?
Yeah, right. Yeah, keeping those pesky bugs.
That's very cool.
These are grown by a fellow colleague who loves carnivorous plants, and because our greenhouses are so limited in space, we like to share space when we can.
Very nice.
So as you can see, the benches are filled quite a bit.
Yeah, they're pretty packed. Brandon needs a bigger greenhouse, you guys.
Yeah, definitely. We're gonna get there.
We're gonna get it. That's right. Is there something that you can share with us about some of the lessons you've learned from growing plants, whether they be philosophical or pragmatic?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and one that I live by every day is just because something is being said in literature doesn't mean it's the only way that you can grow that plant. When I first got here, my former director, who I probably mentioned him 5 or 6 times here already, he's a true inspiration, and he compares growing plants similarly to he compares growing plants similar to cooking in a kitchen. You may have 3 cooks in the kitchen. They may have 3 different styles to getting a final product, a dish out. But as long as it's a good tasting meal and it's true to what is being asked to be made, you have succeeded. So just because literature says that you can only grow it in one way, or some local grower says you have to grow it in this specific way, doesn't mean it's the only way. Be creative, explore different options, and see if it works for you. Just because it doesn't work for them doesn't mean it can't work for you. So I'd say be open about ideas. Don't let others discourage you from going down a route that you think will work, because there's many ways of doing something. For example, growing the orchids here in this greenhouse, we use city water we use tap water. We don't use any reverse osmosis water for this collection. And people are always baffled, how do you grow your plants so well not using RO water?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's many reasons, but the whole concept behind it is, at the beginning I was discouraged to use any RO water for this, or I was actually discouraged from using city water at the moment when the collection first came down, but I proved them wrong in saying it's actually beneficial. These plants like calcium, they like they can be found lithophytically growing in a natural habitat, and because of that we made the connection, and because of that the plants thrive here. The only downside is that you'll find some calcium buildup on the leaves, which can be aesthetically unpleasing, but other than that the plants love it. So we're saving a lot of water but not using RO for this specific collection.
That's awesome. Kind of touch pointing on that, what is some advice that you would give to new students or new horticulturists in the field, as far as going further in the field or making their mark?
Yes, I would highly recommend getting your hands dirty. That's one thing that I firmly believe in. Go out to your local botanic garden, go out to your local organization that deals with plants, and get your hands dirty. Be involved, be a part of the whole horticultural industry, and see what you like, because there's so many things you can do. There's really is so many things you can expand on in the fields of horticulture and agriculture, and you really won't know what you really want to do unless you get your hands dirty and kind of narrow it down. When I first began, when I knew I wanted to get into some plant-related industry, I was like, oh, I want to be a landscape designer. And quickly, after a year after volunteering here, I said, this landscape designing is definitely not what I want to do. It's what I want to be. What I want to do is here. I want to be with the plants, growing these incredible plants that we hope to protect down the line. But I really didn't realize that until I got here and started talking to other people, knowledgeable colleagues, knowledgeable volunteers, that have had some experiences within the agriculture, horticultural field. And they, from there, helped me, guide me into saying, this is the place you want to be. But I highly recommend just getting yourself out there, volunteer your local community garden, volunteer your botanical garden, volunteer where you can. And that will open up so much more for yourself in regards to insight and the ability to figure out where you want to be down the line.
Very nice. Besides orchids, what's another favorite plant group of yours?
Another favorite plant group? That's a tough question. That's a very, very tough question.
Or one you find joy being around, or...
I say bonsai.
Okay.
Because I feel that my generation, we lack patience.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I walk through the bonsai collection here, or the Penjing garden that we have in the Chinese garden, I admire the amount of time each individual takes to put into that one single plant that may have been passed down from generation to generation to generation, and keeping it alive for that duration. That requires patience, skills, knowledge, and a lifetime dedication to a single plant. With orchids, thankfully, they make divisions more prolifically than maybe a bonsai tree, which you may be able to do some level of propagation, but it'll take a very long time. But the message is, I really admire that collection because of the amount of patience. And for myself, I do think I have some level of patience, but not to the level of these bonsai masters.
Yeah, they're really
Truly.
It's a different type of art form associated with horticulture.
Exactly.
And very beautiful. Our last question, I'm just going to ask about some of the literature, websites, clubs, organizations that you would recommend if specifically students or new master gardeners would like to get into orchid culture and care.
Yeah, absolutely. So the two organizations I would highly recommend is the American Orchid Society, which is probably the largest orchid organization society in the United States and actually in the world. They're probably the largest orchid society in the world, and they have over 10,000 members associated to their club. I would also highly recommend Orchid Digest. They produce a beautiful magazine that comes out quarterly, and they usually update things of current events, of new discoveries, new species being discovered, new hybridization discoveries, and just scientific discoveries all around as other countries are developing ways of producing orchids at a faster rate for the market. So it's a really well-rounded magazine, and the American Orchid Society also produces a magazine in which it's geared for more the hobbyist level, introductory level as well. So those two organizations, I would highly recommend subscribing to them or visiting their website because they have a lot of free information that they can provide to you on growing orchids.
Alrighty, Brendan. Well, we really thank you for your time, and this was a wonderful tour, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, thank you.
Okay, see ya.